Welcome to the Empathy Avengers podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Empathy Avengers podcast. We're joined today by our dear friend, Jim Stewartson. Jim has won a Primetime Emmy in Outstanding Achievement for Interactive Stuff. And it's too much for me. Sorry,
Technically interactive television.
cool. Jim also writes on Substack under Mind Dash War, which we'll get into because he's a prolific writer and just brilliant and our friend. Jim, we're just thrilled that you've joined us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mindy. I know it's been a little challenging to pin me down. It's a me thing. Sorry about that. But I need to be here. Thank you.
There's so much to get into. We could talk to you for hours, but I want to get into, as Pamela calls it, your origin story. Jim and I met a little more than 5 years ago on Twitter, and Jim somehow recognized that amongst the, 7 to 8 million people that use Twitter, he saw my little fading star and somehow recognized that I was trapped in the QAnon cult. He took the steps to stand beside me, to help me find credible, real information, and help me to come out of the cult and wake up. Sorry. So I guess my first question for you is, how did you recognize that my star was fading, trapped in this really destructive death cult?
I mean, you're a special person, Mindy, so there's that. And I just saw somebody who was maybe a little misinformed, but obviously had a good heart. And I think that's all that really matters. You can, for me, no matter what people believe, you can always tell if there's a good person in there. And that was during a time when I was deeply concerned about everyone, about the whole country. We'd just been through COVID, or we were in the middle of COVID, I should say.
Mhm.
Everybody had been locked in their houses for months and months on end, and people were diving hard into rabbit holes. And those rabbit holes were deliberate. They were traps. They were psychological black holes that people got sucked into. And I started seeing it everywhere. Just random stuff like people threatening Chrissy Teigen because she's eating babies or whatever. What the
Mhm.
hell is this? What's happening now? And so it was that phenomenon that got me interested in the first place. And because we'd all been through 4 years of Trump, I was like, what's going on here leading up to this election? Because it was clearly connected to trying to somehow undermine America. And so that just led me to QAnon generally. And then a colleague of mine mentioned that it looked like an alternate reality game. And that's a very specific thing to me. It's a form of online gaming that I helped to pioneer 2 decades ago. And it involves an omniscient secret character who's putting out cryptic messages about very important things in a different reality than the one that everybody is living in now. And we used to make these games for things like Halo and Microsoft and Dark Knight Rises and all these very big properties. And we'd build worlds for people to live in online. I used to build these websites that were alive that had artificial intelligence, quote unquote, running through them. And this was 20 years ago when there was no AI. None of that stuff existed, but we were simulating it for people and they loved it. And they also knew that it was ultimately part of a marketing campaign. It's part of something that was getting you into the Halo universe, right? Totally aside from the game, but helped the game in the sense that it widened the universe and got people more attached to the characters. And we thought that was amazing and cool. What I saw with QAnon was that they took those ideas, the ideas of telling stories online, of a secret character that told cryptic messages, and applied it in the worst possible way in the world, which was to traumatize and brainwash people into a particular destructive political ideology. I came to that realization in August of 2020, within a week or two of really starting to look into this. Not because I'm a rocket scientist or a soothsayer, just because I knew what the tricks were that they were using. I just happened to be the guy who built these kinds of experiences for years and years. So I saw exactly what they were doing. Psychologically, it was very sinister because this is a powerful idea, right? You're putting somebody in an alternate reality. And so when people get into these experiences, they go hard and they will do things that are wrong sometimes. They'll go outside the boundaries. They used to try and hack our servers. They'd find the actors in our videos and hunt them down thinking these are clues. And we're like, guys, yeah. And so we'd find ways to put boundaries around. We'd have scheduled times when we would communicate with them so they're not waiting up all night for an operator drop. Instead of Q, one of our bigger characters was the operator. Same exact thing. The operator would do these little drops. And we found out that if we did them randomly, people would sit around waiting for them all the time. And that's unhealthy. It's not good putting people in these modes. We'd see this stuff and we'd put boundaries around it because we're normal human beings who don't want to harm others. But what QAnon and the people who were running it did was do the opposite thing. They made it more random. They made it more confusing. They made it all kinds of odd hours with all kinds of strange topics, literally to deliberately expand the weird gray world that they were trying to get people to live in. Because once they started exploring it, it was the worst stuff in the entire world, right? It was Hillary's the pedophile and all kinds of scary Pizzagate videos and all kinds of horrible stuff. And that was the game that they were playing. The game was, there's a secret agent on 4chan or on these really ugly websites. The secret agent is giving you secret clues, and your job is to help put the clues together. In order to put the clues together is go to the worst websites in the world and look at the worst, most traumatic material you can possibly look at. That was the entire sort of pipeline that I saw. And I saw people like Mindy and many others having been put through, having been told that there's a cabal of elites that are going to start yanking kids off the street, right? And you put those kinds of fears in people, and what are they going to do? They're going to act in ways that are just as extreme as their beliefs. And that is what played out on January 6th. And as Mindy knows, I was screaming my head off the whole time. Again, not because I'm Nostradamus, but because they were telling us. They told us online, like over and over again, what they were doing, where they were going, what the plans are. They had the signs, they had the crosses, they had the whole bit. I just happened to be the guy who immediately was able to see what they were doing simply because I used to be on the other side of it, building these worlds for people, just not these awful ones that they did.
There are a lot of terms we haven't used before on this podcast. One of them you already brought up, alternate reality game or ARG, and the other one is LARP, and that's live action role play. Is that right?
Yeah, so a LARP, the origin of it is literally people, the most famous sort of meme of it is this kid with a stick and he's going, lightning bolt, because he's LARPing that there's a lightning bolt coming out of his stick. And the other guy is, oh my God, you got me. I've been zapped with your lightning bolt, magic man, or whatever, right? Because he's LARPing that he's a wizard, and the other guy's LARPing that he's got hit by the wizard, and like that. So that's how it originally started, as a D&D, but in the real world thing.
Even before that, we used to play Cowboys and Indians or whatever.
Sure, but the actual term LARP has been around since the 80s, and then it came. Then during the 90s, there was like MUDs. I don't know if you remember this, but multi-user dungeons and Moos, which are the early versions of MMOs. Slim Jims on Twitter has a account, right? It's a guy LARPing, or a girl, whoever, intern LARPing as Slim Jims. And sometimes it can be hilarious, right?
Even Gavin Newsom, I'm not sure if he's still
Yeah.
doing it, but he was LARPing as Donald Trump on his Twitter account.
No, that's exactly what it was. That
Yeah.
was, and he still does it. His press account, one of my favorite accounts of all time, it literally took Donald Trump's exact format and just flipped it on its head and made it about Gavin Newsom instead and told the truth instead of lying. And it drove him nuts. And it drove his fans nuts. And there's a specific reason for that. It was a genius thing to do. The reason is because the form and the message are separate things. And the form in this case is all caps with all of the Donald Trumpisms and the giant grandiosity and all of that, right? That's the form. And it's like a virus that sneaks past your defenses by looking like one of your own cells, by fooling it. It's the same thing. It's like it gets past the defenses by looking like a Donald Trump thing, but then by the time it hits and when they read it, it hits them harder because their defenses are down. It's not some lib-looking thing. It's a Trump-looking thing, and that allows the message to sneak through the guard, as it were. And it's a genius strategy that a lot of people since have begun to emulate.
And another term that I remember getting through to me really well, because it was one of the first that I learned from one of your TED Talks, was apophenia. There's the benign version of seeing shapes in the clouds, but I remember very specifically you talking about how people in your games, like you recognized that they would drive themselves crazy looking for Easter eggs, tear apart a wall in the game looking for something that was not there.
Yeah.
And that was a light bulb moment for me. One of the things that you, because you're the protective person that you recognize that guardrails needed to be put in place for it. And like you mentioned, the guardrails were non-existent for QAnon. Can you talk a little bit more about apophenia?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to think of apophenia, at least for me, and maybe because of a specific experience I had, but the easiest way to think of it is if you put anybody in front of a TV screen, and I'm aging myself, but on channel 3 or whatever the hell it was, where there's just snow. And if you sit there in front of it and you force somebody to watch it, eventually a show will come on. Something will come out of it, right? They'll see patterns, they'll hallucinate, they will make something from the noise. Because your mind is a pattern matching device. That is all it is, in a sense, is a pattern matching device. And if you are presented with noise, with no signal, for long enough, you will manufacture the signal in order to find it. And so when we do random stuff because we thought it would be fun for people, oh, we just do a random thing and it'd be like, oh, cool. And everybody be looking for random things. Turns out if you do that, they're like, wait, there's a random thing behind me. Shit. It's real. And it becomes an obsession. And this is used in video games and stuff all the time. But it's also used in abuse. It is a way of conditioning people. Intermittent conditioning is something that you do with dogs and stuff. When you're trying to train them certain behaviors, is sometimes you give them a reward and the rest of the time you punish them.
Right.
But every once in a while you give them a reward and they're just sitting there waiting for it all the time. And that abuse pattern effectively defines what QAnon was. It was post after post of this horrible stuff. And then it would be like, Donald Trump is Jesus or whatever, right? And this completely opposite triumphal comfort hopium would be pumped in between all of this awful stuff. And in some ways, that's how all of social media works, right? Your For You feed is just this array of horrible crap until you see something you like and then you want to do it again. That pattern is something that it's used in advertising, it's used in social media, but it can be amplified to be something that's actually very abusive. And unfortunately for people, victims, it can be addictive.
Yeah.
Yes, abusive and addictive. That is a very apt description.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for all of those insights. And speaking of insights, that's the thing that I got involved in. How I met you was a little bit over a year ago. And it was, I had seen Alnur Musayev, who's a former KGB agent from the former Soviet Union. He had posted in February of last year that Donald Trump had been recruited by the KGB back in the late 80s. And somehow I already had your Substack in my email box. One of my friends had turned me on and I had subscribed, but I hadn't read anything yet. And then it was like, right, that next day, there was an email that had something about Russia and Trump in the title from you and your Substack. And I don't remember exactly which one, but I immediately read it and sucked it up and joined your Sunday Zooms and met Mindy and the rest of the gang. And ever since then, we established the Empathy Avengers. So I am grateful to you because I was enlightened by you and you connected me to Mindy and all the rest of my new friends. And honestly, it's been a godsend. I'm not even religious, but just the idea that I have other people that get what's going on and have helped clue me in to what's going on. And so I appreciate that so much. You do this amazing research that connects all these dots. And even since you started on this journey 5.5 years ago, you have really had your finger on the pulse for the last 10 years or more. And especially when it relates to this Russia craziness. So can you help explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, you might be talking about, I had an article that was fairly popular called Stop Being Shocked,
Probably.
which was around that time. And it's about Donald Trump's very clear subservience to the Russian government. And it goes before to the early 80s, maybe late 70s. First of all, Roy Cohn, his personal lawyer, who's the one who got him out of all of his racism accusations as a slumlord. Roy Cohn was all connected up with both the Israeli government and the Russian government and got Trump connected to all kinds of people. And the earliest sort of known KGB connection is around 1982. If people want to look up Craig Unger on Substack, I've had him on my podcast several times. Absolute brilliant historian on the subject and has traced many of Trump's connections. But the most obvious one, the simplest one for anybody who wants to look, is that in the summer of 1986, on July 4th, 1986, Donald Trump went to Red Square. He went to Moscow to get pitches from the KGB and the Russians about a Trump Tower on Red Square. Now, what happened immediately after that? He started putting out full-page ads in the New York Times. 2 months after he got back from Moscow, basically his foreign policy right now, he wrote it in a full-page ad in the New York Times, anti-interventionist, you pay for your stuff, we're not going to get in your wars anymore, all of the stuff that Russia wanted because they were trying to expand and hold on to their empire. Again, this is the communist Soviet Union we're talking about, right? It's not like the pretend thing that even Putin has. Immediately, he starts doing the business of the Russians. And this is 40 years ago, right? Openly. And at the same time, he then starts putting out racist stuff, like being overtly, deliberately racist. And the next full page ad he took out was what? Was to try and get 5 young black men who didn't do no crime executed. Bring back the death penalty, is what it said, right? Because what is the Russians' most desired result is to sow chaos and hatred and division in America. And nothing has changed since. He has been subservient to the Russian government, whoever was in power, ever since. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean he's a Russian agent? Or does it mean he's a spy? It's beyond that. This is just the relationship he has had with this country for 50 years. And he doesn't know how to change it, and he sure as hell isn't going to change it now. Vladimir Putin gets on the phone with Donald Trump for 90 minutes. 6 hours later, Donald Trump says, I'm withdrawing troops from Germany, the front most important bulwark against Russia on earth that the United States or anyone has is Ramstein and what we've got in Germany. Weakening that is literally the number one job of Vladimir Putin. And Trump gets on the phone and Bob's your uncle. It happens. Now, is that because he's sitting there going, oh, we have the Jeffrey Epstein videos? Putin's got everything, right? He's had everything forever. It's just a subservient relationship, and Donald Trump knows he has to do ultimately what he's told. He doesn't have a choice. It's just been that way for a long time.
Yep. And you have noticed interesting symbolism that has been sneaking into the Oval Office and the White House website. And I think, I don't know if it came from you, but somebody said that even the red tie and the red MAGA hats is a nod to Russia, the red Russia.
More Nazism, honestly.
Yeah.
Look, because look, and you always want to be careful, but they don't hide it. Whenever they have a chance to put Donald Trump on something big, they make it 88 feet.
Why is that significant?
Because it is the most common white supremacist signal in the world. It means Heil Hitler. It's 88 is HH. And it's just what it's been forever. And Donald Trump uses a number anytime he wants. Here's how you know. They ordered somebody, Donald Trump, I want 2 flags. They ordered 200-foot flags, and they went, no, no, no. We want 88-foot flags. Literally. They changed it. There's a bunch of flags outside the Justice Department and outside of Labor. Guess how tall they are? Guess how?
88.
I'll give you one last example. During the Charlie Kirk Memorial, Stephen Miller said, the storm is coming, which is 2 things. It is a direct quote of Joseph Goebbels, and it is also the QAnon slogan.
Right.
Huge storm is coming, and he repeated the number 14,888 murders by immigrants. It is deliberate, right? And they call you crazy if you point it out. And then they just keep doing it because they think it's hilarious. None of it is an accident. I study, and again, you have to be careful because you don't want to assign too much to this. But semiotics is the sort of educational term for the study of signs, of signals, of things that you see in the world that mean things to you that may not necessarily be spelled out. And it's these kinds of signals that set up the overall atmosphere that we're currently living in, which is that all of these ideas and all of these kind of genocidal belief systems have become normalized, and you just see them far too much.
To talk a little bit more about the Russia PSYOP connection, there is another person who is a central figure in all this, Mike Flynn, who we know he ran elections in Afghanistan, running PSYOPs there. So
Yeah.
let's talk about Mr.
He's a good crossover between the previous subject of fascism and the Russians. Flynn was, yes, he ran intelligence for Stanley McChrystal and others in the Middle East for a long time. He was known as the snake eater. You'd give him a target, a person, and he would destroy that person. You'd either kill them or he would use psychological warfare inside their own community to destroy that person's reputation, whatever was required to eliminate that person from the battlefield. That's what he did. Without getting too much into his background, which is deep, he was brought up in a conspiracy theory home. His mother was best friends with Phyllis Schlafly, who started the anti-abortion movement, was a major contributor to the John Birch Society and all of these sort of bonkers anti-communist belief systems, and that both gave him the kind of quasi-fascist beginnings, but also set him off on this everything's a conspiracy kind of mentality. There was a series of humiliations in Afghanistan and Iraq around the generals. Petraeus and McChrystal both had serious problems. They got recalled, and it was just a ginormous mess. And Flynn got sent back to America and got put up to become the Defense Intelligence Agency director. The Defense Intelligence Agency is the largest intelligence agency in the United States, not the CIA, not any of those, the DIA, the military's intelligence. So he was in charge of that. And one of the first things he did was collect all of the white papers and research on psychological warfare designed to topple democracies. Presumably, you'd look at this and think, he's trying to defend us against these terrible things. But actually, not so much. And one of them was about ISIS and about using radicalization techniques to bring people into these cultic environments to radicalize them to overturn governments. And then as DIA director, one of the first things he also did as director was go to Moscow. He was the first American, and maybe only, I think, still American to ever go to GRU headquarters, Russian military intelligence headquarters, in June of 2013. In June of 2013, Michael Hastings, the writer who had written about McChrystal and Petraeus and a lot of these guys, died in a one-car crash as he was about to report on some new thing involving these exact same characters. And one of the last people he emailed was, by the way, and this is very weird stuff, was Joe Biggs, the Proud Boy who helped organize January 6th. Joe Biggs had been a special forces army soldier in Afghanistan and Iraq for Flynn and others. Also, what happened was that Edward Snowden's hack happened. Now, do you know what he happened to have hacked? Hacked the NSA, but he also hacked something even more damaging. The DIA. The DIA's servers were hacked by Edward Snowden. Somehow, Edward Snowden
Now
managed
lives
to
in
get
Moscow.
into Mike Flynn's servers. So let me review briefly. 3 things happened in June of 2013. Mike Flynn went to GRU headquarters. Michael Hastings died in a one-car crash. And somehow Edward Snowden got all of Flynn's secrets. Okay. So now, fast forward to February of 2014, and what happens? Vladimir Putin invades Crimea. Now, what's happening in the intelligence community? Why is it that we seem really surprised by this whole thing? I don't know if people remember, but everyone's, what, Russia invaded? What? Guess what? Because the DIA and Mike Flynn were telling everybody that all of the GRU troops that were building up on the border, remember GRU is where Mike Flynn had just visited, they were building up on the border, 100,000 of them getting ready, and they were the little green men. If people remember, they were called little green men. They were building up on the border, and Mike Flynn was telling the CIA and telling the White House and telling everybody else, stop worrying your little heads about it. He's not going to do anything.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here. And Bob's your uncle. 6 weeks later, Mike Flynn gets retired. And he likes to tell the story that he got retired because he had disagreed about ISIS or something. That's bullshit. He got retired because he deliberately lowered our intelligence assessment of a European ally, our ally, about to be invaded. That's the beginning of Flynn's Russian story. And then he gets fired by Obama. And immediately, what does he do? Sets up Flynn Intel Group.
Wait, what did he get fired for?
That's what I was just saying, is that he says he got fired for disagreeing about ISIS, but it's bullshit. He got fired because he's a traitor, because he openly for months was telling people that this was not going to happen, and then it did. And then he went on NPR and written a lot about this. He went on a bunch of different places to lie about it, to make stuff up about why he didn't know, or why it was a surprise, or why it's not a big deal, or he was desperate to try and cover it up. And it just became obvious that there was something amiss. I think one of the biggest mistakes Obama made, and if people remember when Donald Trump won, anybody remember what the only piece of advice he gave Donald Trump? Don't hire Mike Flynn.
Oh.
That was literally the only piece of advice that Barack Obama gave to Donald Trump. And what did Donald Trump do? He was like, you just confirmed everything. Yes, that's my man. And then the pathway is very clear. Also, the pathway goes through Moscow again in December of 2015, right? Flynn goes to Moscow for the 10th anniversary of Russia Today, the KGB, or the Russian intelligence's premier propaganda outlet.
Right.
Flynn goes to sit to Putin's right at the gala with Jill Stein across the way.
Yeah.
I could go on, but the guy's predilections, his preferences are very clear. He justifies it to himself that, oh, I'm trying to keep Russia away from the commies. That's literally how they justify it, is that we need to be friends with Putin because we don't want Putin to be friends with Xi. Well, that's too late, pal. You're too late. But that is genuinely the attitude. And I was confused about this at first. Why does QAnon hate China so much? Right? Why is it China, not Russia? It's literally this sort of neocon fantasy that if we align with Russia, that we will be able to fight the commies. We'll be able to fight China. Of course, literally today, Donald Trump is begging Xi to help with the Strait of Hormuz. All that's out the door.
Yeah.
Sorry, I digressed.
As an aside, I'm trying to look up the list of things we can call Mike Flynn because I think that we should do that right now. Do we have that list somewhere?
I can tell you most
You
of them.
remember? You already called him a
sure.
traitor.
A traitor, a Nazi, Russian asset, Putin's employee, maybe, I think was one of them. I call him a Nazi for sure.
You can call him Q, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
said he was a leader of QAnon.
The leader of QAnon.
That got thrown out.
Oh,
And I
so
said that he employed Jack Posobiec while he tortured prisoners at Gitmo.
here we go.
He didn't like that because he wants to pretend that Gitmo isn't a torture center. And the reason for that is because he's terrified of war crimes. He's terrified of treason trials. He's terrified of being somebody who's going to go away for being a military traitor. His lawsuit, as well as Kash Patel's, let's not forget that one,
Oh, God, no.
are both projection of the things that they're most afraid of people saying about them, which are the most true things that people can say about them.
Kash Patel is a chud. We do know that.
Technically, Kash Patel $250,000. But again, as soon as I heard that, this judge was really going to try and take jurisdiction over me. Like, what are you doing, dude? Got a lawyer, and we're trying to get the judgment set aside so that I can face this chud in court. Because yes, he literally put in the lawsuit the Urban Dictionary definition for chud, which has to do with an unattractive far-right supporter or something like that.
How is that not true?
First of all, yes, truth is the ultimate defense for everything. Also, I'm allowed to call him a chud. I'm fucking allowed to call him a
And if
chud.
anybody wants to help Jim or other folks defend their right to free speech to call Kash Patel a fucking chud, you can help out at defendspeechnow.org. I just want to plug that a little.
That's the worst part, and they know it about me. I hate raising money. I hate asking people for money. I appreciate you saying that. But that's their whole game, is they have unlimited. Kash Patel wrote in his financial disclosures that He was a client between 2021 and 2024 of the Qatari embassy.
They keep coming up.
And he got $25,000 from a Russian filmmaker to make an anti-FBI propaganda film before he became FBI director. The guy's name is Igor Lopatana. And Kash Patel was in his documentary in 2024 and got paid 25 grand for it. And the guy does literally Putin fluff films.
It's crazy that our FBI director was involved in an anti-FBI propaganda film. That blows my mind.
By the Russians. It's not
But
hidden,
that's
right?
crazy.
None of this shit is hidden. Anybody's following me. Kash Patel and Mike Flynn, they've been tight forever. They used the same law firm to sue me. By the way, the same law firm that sued Daily Beast or Atlantic maybe for saying that Mark Robinson had called himself a black Nazi.
Which he did.
He's now on an apology tour. Yeah, I'm sorry, I call myself a black Nazi. Mark Robinson was at lots of Flynn's events, along with Kash Patel, along with the same lawyer, was on Flynn's tour in 2024, running around the country on his tour bus, talking about how Zelensky is a Nazi and a coke addict. So the aforementioned lawyer, Jesse Banal, is a big player in there. I can't remember if you got Kash in there or not. Tucker's in there.
Of course.
He's got, and he has Tracy Beans Diaz in there, who admitted to running the QAnon community for the first year of its existence. She's in his film as one of his big character witnesses. It was like, why is the first Q lady in there? And we all know the reasons for that.
Someday we're going to make a really good movie that's about how all this mess happened.
It needs a series. It needs like a
Definitely. Yeah. That's
Jim's documentary, American Mindfuck. That's a great place to start.
it was supposed to be the first episode of a show. What you gonna do? Nobody wanted to hear it.
I think people want to hear it now.
Yes, I think it's aged pretty well, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't watch it until just a few months ago because I didn't know about it, but it's 4 years old or something, and it's
5. I shot it 6 weeks after January 6th.
okay. Wow. Definitely we'll link to that. Everyone should watch that, and we could do more content. This episode,
Definitely.
people are watching this, and you should share it with your friends and subscribe and all that good stuff.
Yes.
And definitely
Smash
do that for our
like button. Smash it. Smash it.
subscribe.
We're bad at that too.
I'm so bad at it. It makes me cringe every time. It's like,
Yeah.
Please like me. Please like me. Either you like me or you don't. I don't want to. What I hate is when one person tries to force another person how to feel.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, isn't it? It's just like, stop doing that to make other people believe shit. Present them with whatever it is you think and your evidence or whatever it is, but stop going around. Like, that's the whole thing, is they're trying to go around the thinking part of your mind.
Right. Critical
All
thinking.
of this is about going in the back door and finding ways of influencing people in ways that, in my view, are just immoral. It's immoral to get in somebody's brain and screw around with it without their knowledge. It's just immoral.
Yeah.
Pamela said 2 important words, critical thinking. And one of the things I recognize is the cults suspend our critical thinking skills.
They literally do. And I've studied, one of the things that I look at on my blog is the neurology of it, because there is a neurology. It is known how the mind basically works, right? Up here is where the executive function, the critical thinking skills, your discernment, all of those kinds of things, your intuition. Back here is where your emergency system is. It goes very fast. It's immediate. And what it does, and it's very tricky, it will immediately categorize any input as either emergency, neutral, and you can think about this and put it up here and push it around, or dismiss it altogether, right? And so it's this kind of triage thing. They hijack certain symbols and words and ideas to be associated with traumatic and scary things, and it just skips the front and goes all the way back here.
Yeah.
Immediately. And that is the way that human beings who normally are able to think through things appear to be completely illogical, is because the logic part of their brain literally doesn't turn on. You present them with Donald Trump and they snap into, psychiatry sometimes calls it entrainment. You are literally trained to act certain ways or to mirror him, as opposed to taking in the information, processing it, and coming to a conclusion. That whole second part just doesn't happen.
You wrote an excellent three-part series on this last summer about mirroring and how dangerous it is.
Yeah, and I was going to say the summer before is when those motherfuckers showed up to the convention with those goddamn maxi pads on their ear. And I think that is an excellent definition of mirroring, because
No, it
what the fuck?
really,
Yeah.
no, but that's the thing. When I've described the MAGA movement, I don't mean it pejoratively, but it is more like a school of fish or a flock of starlings. Have you ever seen those when those
Yeah.
big, the
That's all right.
murmurations of starlings
Mhm.
when they're all going, somehow they all go at the same time? It's like, how the hell did you do that? And it's fascinating, and the patterns are really cool, but none of the starlings are thinking individually, right? They're simply being pulled around by this kind of field of other starlings around them. And that's exactly what this is. It takes the individual decision making and evaluation process out of the individual and gives it to the starling master. Sorry, I screwed that whole metaphor up, but hopefully you see where I was going.
We appreciate that you assimilate your thoughts in your brain, you download onto the Substack, and now here today. So thank you so much for that. And I guess I just wanted, with all of your great advice and how you actually helped Mindy and others. So, what is your advice to our listeners who are still frustrated and struggling and feel under siege? And how would you suggest that they feel better and help with this cause?
I think you have to think of it in concentric circles to some extent. It's the old, what they tell you on the plane, you got to put the mask on yourself first because you can't help anybody else unless you do that. So the first thing people have to do is recognize where their own psychological boundaries are, because it took me a long time to figure out where mine were. And I also had the the privilege of having my boundaries tested by others as hard as they possibly could. But one thing that you want to make sure you don't do is expose yourself to materials that you are not able to properly process yourself, to make sure that you understand the basics of how propaganda and basic psychological operations work, just so you don't get yourself down a rabbit hole that you might be surprised that you're going down. Presumably, most of the people listening to this are beyond this point, but there are a lot of people who still have no idea about any of this. The vast majority of them might have heard of it or QAnon or any of this, but the idea that somebody's going to get in my brain, it turns people off. It upsets them. And you have to not be arrogant enough to think that you're immune, because nobody is immune. Some of the smartest people on planet Earth have been taken down dark pathways. So the first thing is to take care of yourself. Make sure that if you educate yourself on these basic topics so that when you encounter this stuff in the world, that you're able to handle it personally. And then what you do is you start widening that circle as much as you can, right? Make sure that your close friends that you're chatting with every day, that nobody's drifting off into some weird space, because that will happen. The world is just a series of traps at this point for people to get sucked into, right? You got the Proligarch trap and the cryptos and the AI, and you got all this shit now. And so you want to make sure that the people around you are psychologically safe and sound and understand. And then to the extent that you have influence beyond that, and this is important, feel psychologically safe in doing so, widen it out. Widen the circle to maybe some MAGA people or whatever that haven't gone completely off the deep end. And don't say a damn thing about politics. Not a thing. You just say hi. Say, hey, how you doing? I haven't thought about you in a while. You doing all right? That's it. You're just a person. Be a person. My best advice is to be a person and to encourage others to be people. Because unfortunately, the actual psychology of these people is not like us. I don't mean this to be dehumanizing, but they're not the same. They're not people in the same sense that we see ourselves as part of a larger fabric of others that we have a responsibility to care for to some extent, right? These personalities that we're dealing with, they don't have that. Everything is just data to them. It's just a video game where they're moving numbers up and down. And for some of them, they actually like hurting people. Sadism is a part of the psychology with some of them. But some of them are just sociopaths. They just don't care. There's nothing behind it. Our job is to prevent the spread of this disease because they are trying to spread it. They are trying to make it so that others don't care. To the extent that Elon Musk goes on his little Twitter every day and talks about suicidal empathy. You can't have empathy because you're suicidal. You know, it's an overt desire to turn people from networked caring creatures to numbers that can be easily manipulated. And so the more empathy that we have for each other, the less power that they have. And that's the whole point of it. So don't give them that power. Don't give them the power to dehumanize you or anyone else. Be militantly empathetic, as it
Yeah.
were.
Unapologetically.
Unapologetically,
Radically
avengefully empathetic.
Dun, 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 dun. That's why we're avenging empathy here on the Empathy Avengers podcast. Thank you so much.
So, absolutely, being radically empathetic is how we are going to get through this with our community intact. I am so grateful for our Empathy Avengers community, but also the community that Jim has built. And our listeners can all be a part of that too. All you got to do is become a paid subscriber to Jim's Substack, Mind Dash War. And Jim has a weekly Zoom where we all get to ask questions and talk. And really, it's so healing to be among people who care as much as we do about our democracy and who are radically empathetic. So grateful for that community. It's really the only way we're going to get through this shit. But yeah, subscribe to Jim Substack, watch his documentary, American Mindfuck, and catch him on Radicalized Truth Survives podcast. There's also a weekly live on there where you get to hear from Jim and Heidi Kuda and Hi-Fi. And it's a ton of fun. See us in the chat on YouTube. It's a blast. But getting to talk with Jim today, I really hope our listeners give it a second listen because it's just been so rich and so deep, Jim. Like I said, it has been well worth the wait. So thank you
Minnie.
again.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
It's great being
So
here.
really enjoyed it. So thank you everyone for joining us once again for the Empathy Avengers podcast, where kindness is your superpower and empathy saves the day.
The Empathy Avengers, where we put empathy into action.